Yamcha, he might be known as a loser to you. In fact, he might have failed in most of the things he ever tried. But even the losers have their moments. Hello there, beautiful friends from all around the world. I am your host, Blackenfist. And yes, I got a peculiar list today. We are most familiar with Yamcha's failures in his life because you could say overall, out of almost all the characters on the main cast, he was probably the one who failed the most and failed hardest in life. But even those guys have their moments to shine. They might be brief and they might be far and in between and rare as heck, trust me. I had to scrape the bottom of the barrel for this one. But today I really want to highlight Yamcha's more pleasant moments, the moments he actually did things and got to build himself up. And these are Yamcha's top 10 most awesome moments. Number 10. Yamcha's preliminary match with the Wolf Man. And yeah, this is a pretty small moment, but it's one of those moments where Yamcha actually didn't receive help in one of his fights, or wasn't subject to outside interference, like for instance when he fought the Invisible Man. Yamcha did this one all on his own, and because Yamcha usually doesn't make it out of the first round in the finals, but he always does make it through the preliminaries, and I think this one was probably the coolest match Yamcha did have in the preliminaries, where he did get to show off his wolf fang fist to a wolf. Of course, this is on the lower half of the list and number 10 because this fight was against who? And was only a couple seconds long, but regardless, for what it is, I thought it was pretty cool. Number 9. Yamcha having the hindsight to cut Goku's tail. While Yamcha was tailing Goku and the gang, he did figure out Goku's weakness. Later on, this information did become very crucial when Goku looked at the moon and transformed. Yamcha was the only one to put 2 and 2 together, and the first one to discover Goku's trigger to returning back to a human. Of course, it was not guaranteed because, as other people have noted, we didn't really know it would transform Goku back to a human. For all he could know, it could have gotten rid of Goku's weakness completely and Goku would have still remained a complete giant ape. But you know what? Yamcha at least had the analytical hindsight to know that ahead of time before anyone else, so he gets props for that. Number 8. Yamcha training for the first World Martial Arts Tournament. Yamcha's training practically has never looked better, and this is probably the most awesome scene of Yamcha training in the entire series. As we know, Yamcha's training has been infamous for being one of the most pathetic moments that Yamcha's ever had, specifically when he tried to prove himself to Vegeta and got crushed by gravity. But this is before then, and before Yamcha started to feel inadequate, when Yamcha was seeming to be in an intense, focused training sessions where he did seem like he was gaining strength. I also gotta dig the shadows and the shading in this scene as well. But this is definitely one of those times when Yamcha really does get to shine instead of him pathetically and leisurely training. Number 7. Yamcha saves Bulma, Puar, and Oolong from the mayhem for when Goku transformed. Yeah, that's right, instead of Yamcha being saved, he actually saved someone for a change. And probably, I think, the only time Yamcha ever does that. It's also the moment when Yamcha finally gets over his pathetic fear of women. He was actually contemplating on whether or not to do it because of that fear, and he at the very least beat his own fear on his own, which I think is the only time we see Yamcha ever beat one of his own fears in the entire series. As we all know, Yamcha will become a very fearful person and practically stop fighting later on because of that, but let's not think about that for now. At least for now, he actually conquered one of his fears and saved his friends in the process, which you gotta commend him for that. Number 6. Yamcha's introduction in the movie Curse of the Blood Rubies. This has to be my favorite scene from the whole movie. And it's not always just all to do with Yamcha. I really did like the backgrounds and the coloring and shading in this scene. But it was a combination of all those aspects, and it really did make Yamcha menacing and threatening. In fact, if I didn't know any better, I would think Yamcha was kind of a badass if I just had this scene to go on. This is the only time I really have felt that Yamcha was threatening. But regardless, this scene really is one of the only few times where Yamcha has complete confidence in his own abilities, and for that reason I thought he was extremely threatening in this scene. Number 5. Beating up Olibu. Now, I know this scene is only a couple seconds long, so why am I putting it in number 5 in the top 5? Well, I just want you to think about this for a minute. Yamcha kicks off Olibu like it's nothing, which really doesn't make sense. Logically, Yamcha is not in Olibu's league. Olibu is supposedly the strongest human in the universe, and the reason I say this is if you think back to it, Olibu held his own against Qaaman, a character that is compared to Cell. So, think about that for a minute. Olibu is in the ballpark of Qaaman, a character who's compared to Cell, and then Yamcha comes in and inflicts him off like it's nothing. It doesn't make sense at all. In fact, it should be the other way around. But regardless of whether it makes sense or not, it happened, and I guess you gotta give credit to Yamcha there because damn, he just flicked off an insanely powerful character that was not supposed to be that weak, and it's not supposed to be flicked off that easily. So, the only thing I could say is, good job, Yamcha. Number 4. Beating up Recoome. Now, Recoome might not be as strong as Olibu, and it might be a little ridiculous for Yamcha to be beating up Recoome. But you know, the reason I put this above the last one is not only because it's longer, but also because it's a lot more believable. In the last one, him beating up Olibu was pretty ridiculous. As I said before, no logical way that Yamcha is even in the ballpark of Olibu. At least in this example, Recoome and Yamcha are a lot closer together, so it's a lot more believable for that reason. But just because Recoome is weaker doesn't mean Recoome isn't a slouch. Recoome is way stronger than Yamcha at this point, but Yamcha is able to manage, and at least in the anime filler, he does seem to gotten a lot stronger, considering that he could beat someone up like Recoome. Number 3. And this one's gonna seem weird to you guys, but I think Yamcha playing baseball was actually a pretty awesome scene. This has always been one of my favorite scenes for years now, because it highlights how the Dragon Ball characters cope returning to a normal life. I really like the way how Yamcha's talking about paying his rent and about how baseball's so easy, but he has to do it because it pays so good. Some people might interpret this as Yamcha being pathetic, but you know, I always thought this was actually a pretty cool idea. This scene is filler, but it was a thing that Akira Toriyama suggested himself. Akira Toriyama suggested that if they're gonna make filler, why not make Yamcha play baseball? Which, I gotta agree with Toriyama on this one. Making Yamcha play baseball is definitely a good insight in how a Dragon Ball character copes integrating into a normal life. And you also get to see Yamcha have a little fun when the brawl breaks out. And it's actually been one of my more favorite filler moments from the entire series. So, Yamcha playing baseball is alright with me. Number 2. Yamcha jumping in to help Gohan against Cell. And yes, I know this is not entirely Yamcha's credit, because this was more of a collective moment. Tien, Krillin, Piccolo were all involved as well, but so was Yamcha. And I always thought that Piccolo, Krillin, Tien, and Yamcha jumping in against Cell was one of the most awesome things that happened in the entire series. Guys that were so weak but they jumped in anyway to fight Cell. And I always thought that was pretty cool. Even though it's a collective moment, Yamcha, in my opinion, is in one of the greatest moments in DBZ history, so you gotta give him credit for at least a part of it. And it really shows that even though Yamcha can be an extreme coward and concerned with trivial things sometimes, now when Yamcha is pushed in the right direction, he will set aside his cowardice and his trivial thinking right in with everyone else, straight into battle and possibly their own deaths, which was a very real possibility at the time. So you got to commend Yamcha for that. Here it is, number 1. So what is the number 1 moment? Yamcha beating up on Goku when he first meets. Yamcha freaking punches Goku through 3 pillars of rock. When will Yamcha ever get the chance or be able to do something like that again? Yes, Yamcha might be pathetic, he might be weak, he might be a failure, but at least he can go to his grave knowing that he at least beat Goku up once in his life. The main character, the guy that becomes so freaking strong that he becomes one of the strongest characters in the universe. He can at least say once that he beat that guy up. And yes, it's as a kid, and yes, Goku was hungry, which I guess did handicap him. Still, guys, you gotta think that Yamcha is gonna brag that all the way to his grave, saying, yeah, you know what? I beat Goku up once. So in my opinion, it doesn't get any better than this for Yamcha. And it's quite telling that this moment happened right in the beginning of the series. So Yamcha's greatest moment happened around that time, and it was all downhill from there, which is kind of sad when you think about it. When you think about Yamcha's greatest moment was at the very beginning, and from then on, it was all downhill. And Yamcha would never be able to regain that greatness. But at the very least, he can die happy. He can die knowing that he beat up the strongest warrior in the universe once. So well, there you go, guys. That was my list. And as I said before, I had to dig really deep to find these moments. So if anyone else has an awesome Yamcha moment that I did not mention, I would actually like to know, because I really do think that these 10 moments are not just Yamcha's top 10 moments. They might be Yamcha's top 10 only awesome moments in the entire series, which is kind of sad when you think about it. So I would actually really like to know, because you guys have always been good at trying to find things that I might have missed. So if there are any other moments, I would really like to know, and I'd really appreciate that. But guys, I'm not the only one who did a silly list. Go check out Qaaman, as he has his own wacky list, or maybe not so wacky, of his top 10 favorite songs from the entire Dragon Ball series. So if you're interested in knowing that, you can go check that out. The link will be in the description. But regardless, guys, I am not done talking about Yamcha, because as we all know, although Yamcha did have some of these awesome moments, Yamcha's more famous for his failures, which we'll talk about soon. But as always, guys, I am Blackenfist,